This is Only the Strong Survive, a podcast powered by Kahn Media, where we dive deep into the world of business, leadership, and innovation. I'm your host, Dan Kahn, and I'm honored to have you join us today. So, let's get ready to learn some survival skills together. Welcome back to Only the Strong Survive. I'm your host, Dan Kahn, and today I'm joined by Tim Herbel, the founder of Not Your Average Joe. This nonprofit is dedicated to reducing unemployment among differently abled individuals after high school, while also preparing those with intellectual and developmental disabilities for the workforce. Quick story, I was at a media conference last year in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, and to be totally honest, the hotel coffee stank, and I went, I need and I'm a real coffee guy, and I think our listeners know that. And I said, I want to get a real cup of coffee. My first day on the ground there, and I like to go local. I try to avoid the big kind of mega chains. Just saw a random place on Google Maps that looked good and had great reviews, and thought, okay, I'll drive over there. And I walked in, and it was just a 10. Like, from the greeting I got from the employee who was working there was the most effusive, positive, happy young man. The coffee was excellent. The whole experience was so good. And you could kind of tell that some people working there had kind of a different vibe going on. And it was just a really neat experience. I came back the next day, came back the third day on the way back to the airport. To be honest, I kept thinking about it for months afterwards. And I thought, this is so cool. And then I started learning about their business model, which is what I'm excited to share with you guys today. So cold, out of the blue, we reached out to Tim and his team, and he's probably thinking, like, who are these people and what do they want? But we said, hey, you've got a really cool business. You've got a really cool story. Most of our guests on the show are all about building for profit or trying to scale some business as a startup or to try and sell it or get into private equity. This is a different episode. This is about changing people's lives, and it's such a cool one, and I'm excited to have you on. So Tim, after that long preamble, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Dan. It's exciting to be here. So thank you very much for not only paying attention to the mission, but also noticing that the coffee was good too, because they're meant to go side by side.
It was excellent coffee. So I guess to start, Tim, just for the listeners who are kind of learning about you for the first time, can you give us the kind of rundown? What is Not Your Average Joe?
So Not Your Average Joe is basically Disney World with better coffee, Dan. That's kind of how we describe it. We're a nonprofit here in Oklahoma City, but we operate on a business chassis. So that makes us unique in the 501c3 world. We're kind of a social enterprise. And so from the beginning, we wanted to make a difference in the statistic that 77.5% of those who have an intellectual, developmental, or physical disability are unemployed after high school. We're like, that's no bueno. What can we do about that? And so we launched a coffee shop with side-by-side inclusionary employment. And when you came in, we wanted you to obviously notice what our mission was, but we also didn't want to be one of those charities that had a really good cause but have a terrible product. And so we focus a lot on exceptional coffee. So we have 5 Specialty Coffee Association master level roasters on staff. We've also won Oklahoma City Business of the Year for 2022 from Mayor Holt here, and that's the 20th largest city in the United States. And so we think we're succeeding on all those levels. We started 5 years ago with 4 employees, 1 location. And Dan, today I'm happy to say we have 6 locations and approaching 200 employees, and 150 of those have some kind of superpower. We like to say we are dispensing caffeine and hope daily here at Not Your Average Joe.
That's so cool. And also, apart from your mission and the nonprofit and just putting all of that aside, which all of that is amazing. That's impressive scale just for any business. I also want to just kind of dig in, and I want to learn about how you did it. But to start, kind of, where did the idea for this come from? What was the genesis of this whole?
Absolutely. So I had an 11-year-old nephew who passed away, Dan, with special needs. Braxton was born with cerebral palsy and hydrocephalus and was always excluded his whole life. When his family was out shopping in the community, people would walk across the street to avoid the all-electric wheelchair. When he was at school, he had some really great teachers, but he had some video surveillance testifying to such that would put him in the corner and literally leave him there for the hour or the day. And even his own church asked him not to come back. They just didn't know what to do with the totally disabled child. And so when he passed, Uncle Tim promised him that, hey, buddy, if I can fight for the cause of inclusion for people of all abilities, I'm going to do that. And years went by, and an opportunity came where we could take over a coffee shop in Midtown Oklahoma City. So Oklahoma City has had explosive growth the last 20 years and has grown to be the 20th largest city in the United States now. And so we're in this hustling, bustling place, real close to all these apartment complexes, hospitals, hotels, tourism, And so it's a good place to be to showcase what we do. And we launched Not Your Average Joe, and we've been trying to make a difference ever since then, January 1st, 2019.
Wow. So first of all, launching a retail food service type business in 2019 means you had about a year before things got a little hairy. How did you handle that whole situation?
So, and I apologize to your viewers in advance. I'm an NCAA arena announcer at night, Dan, and so I'm having to force myself not to go into my voice. Here we are, by grit and grace. We grew 42% for the 14 months before our friend COVID showed up on the doorstep. But unlike most restaurants during COVID, we didn't shrink. And so therefore we didn't get government money. We actually grew 11%. But I think COVID was good for us. It focused us to pay attention to what we were doing. The mission was, so important. We didn't want to fail our friends and their families. And so we buckled down. We just prided ourselves on serving the community by being a safe place in every way. And so as we came out of COVID, we were able to open 4 new locations. One's on the campus of the University of Oklahoma. That was our second location, and the altruism of college students and the wholeness of our mission were good combinations. And so that fire started to spread across the city, and then local high schools started raising money. Hey, if we give you this money, can you start a store in our community? Can you do that? But our first 5 stores we did without any money. And I don't recommend that for a nonprofit, not the model I would suggest. But it is our model moving forward that we have about $300,000. And so 2 high schools in Edmond, Oklahoma area, Deer Creek High School and Edmond Santa Fe, went together, and one raised 180, one raised 120. So that's our 300,000 magic number. So we'll be in Edmond this fall. And then the students of more public schools have just raised $228,000. And so we have to get the other 72, but we should have a store in both Edmond and Moore by the end of the year, taking us to a total of 8 locations.
That's incredible. What a cool thing that your funding is coming from student fundraising. That's amazing. Going back to store 1, because I assume once you've got kind of a model that works, you can scale it and you can have some like SOP documents and figure out like, okay, this works for onboarding and training. This doesn't. This is what our menu looks like. But going back to the first one, I imagine that's a heavy lift. Have you started retail businesses before? How do you know how to do all that?
So I grew up in the best named town in the United States. If you'll allow the arena announcer voice. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I'm a proud graduate of Hooker High. So I grew up in the Oklahoma Panhandle, so it's way out there, 5 hours from Oklahoma City. At Hooker High, we had 32 kids in my class, 27 boys, 5 girls. I dated lots of farmers' daughters. But my dad was the town butcher. He ran the town grocery store. And my mom was the town baker. And in that small community, you were taught that the customer's always right. You want to love your neighbor. I was DoorDash or shipped before those things. Dad helped me, gather the groceries and say, hey, off you go. That's really the background there. I went into full-time ministry in chapter 1 of my life. Chapter 2, I was in financial services. Chapter 3 is my sweet spot where I help people. And those things I learned in the previous 2 chapters have been very, very, very beneficial. But we did from the beginning know that we had to have great coffee. And so we focused on education, but without being pretentious. A lot of coffee shops you go into, if they're really good at coffee, they're pretty snobby about it and look down on you if you have coffee your way. And Dan, we want you to enjoy coffee according to your palate. We focused on SCA, which stands for the Specialty Coffee Association training. And so we have the first female certified roaster in the state of Oklahoma by the SCA. We're the only coffee shop in the state of Oklahoma to send a barista to the U.S. Barista Championship. And now we have the first and only Native American female certified coffee roaster in the world. So we got a lot of girl power at Not Your Average Joe, in addition to the other things going on there. All 3 of those ladies are amazing. We did that, and then we put together a good menu. So arguably, we have the best turkey club sandwich in Oklahoma City. There is a local media venue here that is called the Lost Ogle. They came and did a surprise visit with their foodie and said, we have the best sandwich in Oklahoma City that nobody knows about. It's called the Suspicious Sandwich, named after our friend Elvis Presley and his love of peanut butter and banana sandwiches. But Dan, we up it in the Okie fashion with some bacon, and then we add some local honey, and then we throw some jalapeno raspberry jam on that baby, and we put it on blueberry bread, toast it up. Oh, thank you very much. It is delicioso.
That sounds great, and maybe not healthy, but definitely tasty.
It is sweet, salty, and spicy. We now cater for up to 700 people. Our chef has autism. She's culinary trained out of Columbus, Ohio. We cater for OU football, and they have a lot of dietary restrictions restrictions that we have to work with the nutritionists there on the team. We do the food. We do homemade ice cream. We have Dr. Pepper chocolate chip, homemade banana pudding. And as you know, you went to the Broken Arrow store. Some of our stores are flagship stores that have full food, homemade ice cream, all the coffee bells and whistles. Some of our stores are just coffee and pastries. And as we expand, our goal is to only have the flagship stores that offer everything.
That's really cool. And I think you mentioned last time we talked that you've got a little bit of a background with being a barista and coffee as well, right?
Yeah, sure. I finished 13th in the country this year. There are these competitions where they grade your latte art or your barista skills. I am effective with my palate. I'm good at tasting things. And so there's a cupping competition or a taster's competition, and I finished 13th in the country this year. But I try to let the rest of my staff shine on that. I just jumped in because we had an opportunity.
That's pretty cool. As somebody who has been trying to make a proper latte myself for about a decade and still can't do it.
Well, Dan, it all starts with the right beans, right?
This is true. So let's talk about that. Where did you find your vendors? Like because you're right. I've eaten, like I said, I've been to your store 3 times, which is I'm sure way less than most of your normal customers, but I live out of state. All 3 were excellent experiences. And I drink a lot of coffee and I'm kind of a snob about it, to be honest. So how does that come about? How do you figure out a supply chain? Where are you finding your vendors? How does that all work?
Well, like anything, would tell your listeners, it's all about relationship, right? And you've got to put yourself out there to make relationships. So we're in the coffee industry. So we go to the coffee meetings and we join the SCA and we go to the conventions in Chicago or Seattle or New York or San Antonio. So I think that's part of it. And through that, when you give back to your industry, you meet people. So the competitions are all driven by volunteers. And so you jump in and you help wash dishes. You help be the public address for the competition. You run backstage, whatever. During all of this time, we've met lots and lots and lots of people. Of course, you take some source trips to places like Uganda or Costa Rica. You meet farmers and you see where they're living and what they're producing. And then, of course, you have to do the cupping to make sure that, hey, what somebody's trying to sell you is worthwhile. So we are about to bring into Oklahoma the most expensive green coffee that has ever landed here. It's part of a nano lot purchase that we got. And some of your listeners, if they love coffee, may be familiar with what's called the bubblegum coffee out of Nicaragua. It literally, Dan, tastes like bourbon in the cup.
Wow.
Like straight up. You're like, whoa. But a friend of ours, Wei Hong Zhang, just won the Brewers Cup in that competition this year, which is you can't hide behind milk. You can't hide behind the machines. You can't hide behind latte art or anything else. It's just you and the judges and the coffee, right? He won the best cup of coffee in the United States this year, and it tastes like strawberries and jasmine tea. It's delicious. And you ready for the punchline? It's decaf. The best cup of coffee in America this year is decaf. And if you didn't know that, or if you knew it, you wouldn't try it, right? Death before decaf, here for coffee lover.
Yeah, you made a comment earlier that I actually really liked, where you were kind of talking about how a lot of your fundraising has been done by high school students, how kind of the community of college students has been really welcoming to your brand and to your team and to your concept. It certainly is, in my experience, I've seen younger people, Gen Z and Gen Alpha and that whole kind of group, they want more than just to buy a product, right? They want to feel good about it. They want to feel like it's an authentic experience. They want to feel like maybe they're contributing to some sort of social good. Your model certainly falls in line with that. How does the 1-to-1 ratio work? How do you recruit? Where do you find your employees? And how do you train these folks so that they have kind of a career path and all that? Kind of give us the whole gist of the staffing side of the business.
Dan, I love this question perhaps the most that out of all that we've asked so far, because I wrote my master's thesis on mentoring back in the day. We're in a law office right now across the street from one of our stores that donates a little space for us. And so we have 16 people that need to be in the shoebox, including our interns that are in here. From the beginning, we want to make sure that we're giving back to and investing in others for future generations to lead. And we learn as much during their tenure with us as they learn. Funny enough, 2.5 years ago, there is a class at the University of Oklahoma that's called IBC. It stands for Integrative Business Core, and it's sponsored by a local bank here in Oklahoma called IBC. The students in this class study marketing, management, and finance all at the same time. They have to form an LLC. They have to go to the bank and present a pro forma and business plan, get a loan, manufacture a product, sell the product, give the proceeds to one charity, and then take the time that it did to do all of this and double that up and donate time to another charity. 2.5 years ago, Not Your Average Joe was chosen to be a part of IBC. Funny enough, 2.5 years later, After these kids donated their time to us and worked, 40 hours over the course of a semester, 3 of them are now full-time at Not Your Average Joe.
Wow.
Our chief marketing officer, our chief financial officer, and my right arm, my personal assistant. We are super grateful for altruism of young people because obviously they see the need and the injustice of what is 77.5% unemployment for those with special needs and under 4% for those of us that are neurotypical. And they want to help bridge that gap. So we're grateful for that. We've also teamed up with AmeriCorps early on. Your listeners may be familiar with that. It's kind of like Peace Corps for America. You give back, you serve. And so we're able to provide mentors for some of our friends with higher support needs. And our AmeriCorps members here help provide that. Obviously, you go through training, you learn about people first language, you learn about redirection, you learn a lot about patience. It's a joy. It's a joy. And the thing about working with friends with special needs, you'll learn pretty quickly that they are loyal, they're on time, they want their job, they don't want to be at home alone, although that may be attractive to some of us who have been out in the workforce for a while. It gets old after a while. They just long to be here. And so it's a really positive work environment. Obviously, the young people that we hire make that happen as well.
That's really cool. And you're right. And it's interesting. I have actually a couple of cousins that are autistic, and they're not only two of the most positive, happy, just good people that I know by any measure, but they want to have purpose. They don't want to just sit around, right? And society doesn't always make room for people like that. So the fact that you're doing that, I think, is really cool. Do you have any kind of examples or case studies of employees that have kind of been with you now for a couple of years and how they're doing, and now they have sort of this mission and this purpose and all that?
Lots of stories. Not even sure where to start on that one. Since we were talking about autism for a second, I had the privilege of speaking on the stage with Dr. Temple Grandin recently at a symposium.
Wow.
And she made mention that if Boeing had hired somebody with autism to put in the screws on the fuselage, the door would still be there. She's a quick wit. We love that. But I'll start with the story of someone with quick wit as well. We have a gentleman by the name of Brady on our staff that you've met, I believe, over there in Broken Arrow. Brady was a college student at the University of Oklahoma, getting a degree in biology, paying for school, doing construction on the side. There was a worksite accident. Supervisor's nail gun ricocheted, and the nail landed in Brady's brain. He fell off the roof. He died, brought back long enough for mom and dad to say goodbye, left him in the coma, and months later he woke up. But today, Brady's the assistant manager of the Broken Arrow store. He drives, not at night, but he still drives. And he's funny. That nail's still in the middle of his head. He loves to tell everybody that comes in, hey, it's okay if I have a nail on the run because you've got a screw loose. And seeing what friends can do if given the opportunity is amazing. Across the street is Bubba. Bubba came to us, Dan, at the age of 39. He had never had a job. And now Bubba's 40. And when Bubba came to us a year ago, he couldn't read. But Dan, Bubba can read now. And so he's got a job. He's improving his life skills. And the boy can dance. And so if you come to Midtown, let us know. And you come in. And Bubba, what's funny is it's not like those restaurants in the old days that would play the Macarena every hour and the waitresses come out and the Congo line, whatever.
Right.
If it's just a random song he likes, up he goes. And it's just the spontaneity that makes it work. And every employee as well as customer in the house will be getting down with Bubba. And he just loves to live out loud. And so that's what we try to do there at Not Your Average Joe. And those are 2 stories of 150 and more that we have. It's a special place.
Well, it's pretty clear listening to you talk, Tim, that it seems like you're in a groove, like you have found something that you're really passionate about. And I think that's incredibly admirable. And most people don't ever find that. And the fact that you're also kind of improving your community at the same time is really neat. What are your goals? What's the long-term plan for Not Your Average Joe?
When you break down what we do, we earn about 60% of our income right now through sales, buying coffee and a sandwich, homemade ice cream, perhaps a bag of coffee. We really want to scale individual verticals within our nonprofit. So for example, business to business sales. And not only is our mission good, but our coffee's good. And it's not just good, it's exceptional and it's award winning. And we win blind cuppings all the time against some of the biggest names in coffee in the United States. So what if we went and sold 5-pound bags of coffee to churches, restaurants, hotels, or coffee addicts like Dan Kahn? I mean, just getting that wholesale business going. And if we can drive those to 7 figures, well, then we can provide benefits for our staff. Because as of today, Dan, that's the weakness, behind the curtain, sharing with everybody. It's like, hey, we've built wide, but now we got to build deep where it won't last. And so benefits is one of the things that we've not had on the table just yet. And so between now and the end of the year, I'm going to pass a threshold that Uncle Sam says you have to offer those. And so I've got to get busy, and we've got to figure out how to drive that vertical. One of the neat things about Not Your Average Joe is we did our first 5 stores without any help, ostensibly. And to date, we've had no help from the government with what we've done for adults with special needs. We get a little bit of help from the state to do an internship program for high school students, but we've had no help for those 21 and above. The fact that we've been quote, unquote, faithful with little has impress some people. And so hopefully we'll just continue to develop more and more partnerships. But our goal is to drive a vertical in wholesale business, getting on grocery store shelves with our coffee, with jam, with homemade ice cream. Homemade ice cream is probably a year out, but the coffee and jams, we just came from a test kitchen and we're producing a spice rub that leads with coffee to put on pork ribs and a hamburger, but it's got some smoked onion and paprika and magic spices in there I can't tell you about, but it's divine. So anyway, driving those verticals on the business to business. And then secondly, we're wanting to drive the vertical on the individual stores, doubling the volume of what we can do at each store. Midtown's our OG store here in Oklahoma City, and we're putting in a new patio. We're a nonprofit, but we think entrepreneurially. We're like, hey, we've been here 5 years, time to do a little remodel, reboot. So we're going to do that. We're also launching a new concept, whereas at Not Your Average Joe, the coffee shops, friends work 3 to 4 hour shifts, Dan. And the new concept, which will be called Abe's, they'll work 6 to 8 hour shifts. And Abe's is a food-driven thing. You'll walk into this space and it'll look like you've walked into a campsite in Canada or in Colorado. And it's really cool. We'll do organic fresh squeezed juices. We'll do affogatos. But what makes it special is our packaging and then our secret food item that we lead with that I can't tell you about just yet. But that's why everybody can follow us on social media for the big reveal, right? And then the other thing is we're going to go out of state. Amarillo, Texas will be our first store out of state. We've already identified our manager out there and the community's ready for us. And we're just waiting for a couple of months for some things to pan out logistically. And we've already done some tilling of the soil out there, so to speak. But every day, Dan, we're asked to hire approximately 12 neighbor, niece, nephew, kid. And every day we're invited to many places from San Diego, Estes Park, Albuquerque, Omaha, Little Rock, Dallas, Fort Worth, Melbourne, Florida, Harlem, New York. And those are legitimate inquiries. And of course, in Oklahoma, you can double that number again. So our goal by the end of the year, open the 2 new stores in Edmond and Moore, launch the new concept. And next year, we'd like to open at least a store every other month. And so that we can continue to expand that. And so we're on a 100-day quest to reboot all of our SOPs, get all of our ducks in order there, launch our Tiger teams. And we're off to the races.
That's really impressive. That's really interesting. So I'm curious, when you're mapping out the next couple of years, you're trying to figure out your expansion plans, going into new states, going into new markets. And obviously you've got sort of a CSR component to what you're doing because it is sort of, as a nonprofit, you have a slightly different business model, but you're still competing with the Starbucks and the big coffee chains. And at the end of the day, your customer is just looking to buy a cup of coffee and hopefully also maybe if they can make some positive change, that's great too. Do you look at that stuff or do you not worry about it? Like how much time do you spend worrying about the big kind of giant corporation guys?
I'm a big believer in David and Goliath. I like being on the opposite street corner. That wouldn't bother me. If you get to visit Midtown here, there are probably 8 coffee shops within a walk of where I'm standing. And everybody offers something. We don't sell convenience at Not Your Average Joe, at least not currently. We sell community and we sell exceptional coffee served by even better people. We dispense the caffeine and the hope. We're here just to provide that place where you can have time by yourself to read a book in the corner, or you can have a power meeting, but you're not just throwing your money away for, coffee that tastes bad, that's hidden somewhere under the sugar. It's a good cup of coffee that has an equally good cause. So I don't worry too much about it. Now, location still matters. If I can get next to a university campus as a coffee shop, that's better. If I can get close to a hospital, that's good. If I can get where there's walking traffic, that's great. Those things matter to me. We are struggling going into Edmond because of 2 things. When we put our pro forma together, it took 2 years. This thing called inflation hit. That 300,000 that's good enough for more is not good enough for Northwest Edmond. It's just a built up area right now. It's going gangbusters. And so I probably need to go find 50,000 more dollars. So that's my biggest concern there, is just how we adjust. And again, 60% of what we make goes to pay the bills, and the rest is what we, come up with, either contracts or grants. We got a baby grant today from one of the local gas and oil companies. We started a new tradition, Dan. You would have loved it. We did a conga across the street from over here, and we all took shots of, either Red Bull or espresso. The OG store has a 9-point stat over there as well. Anyway, we just had a good time, and it was fun.
I was going to ask about that. So there are opportunities for corporate giving if a company believed in your mission, and obviously you're sitting in a room right now that sounds like it's provided by something like that. So, but even financially, if a company said, hey, I like your mission, I want to help, how do we get involved? They can do that.
Absolutely. nyaj.coffee. It's the first letters of Not Your Average Joe, nyaj.coffee, and, send us an inquiry and we can talk. But I'll give you an example and a shout out to a company. Simple Modern is a drinkware company, and they got in early on working with universities and professional sports teams on licensing. They say I'm Tony Stark. So there you go. If you walk into their headquarters, it says we exist to give generously. And this year we got to go and present our mission, and they chose us as one of their giving partners. And then Express Employment International does the same with us to help us with one of our training centers. And so both of them are very kind. Chesapeake and Devon both recently have given us small grants to just participate and help a little bit. As I mentioned, the kids at More Public gave 228. That means we're 72,000 short to close the gap. Just FYI. So 77.5% of those with special needs are unemployed after high school. The number of kids in a high school on an individual education plan, in other words, Dan, they have a diagnosed disability, is roughly 11%. 11% of a student body looks forward to 77.5% of underemployment or unemployment. Not Your Average Joe provides that hope. And that's why those students said, hey, every year we do this giving to a philanthropy. We want Not Your Average Joe. And most of the time they give it to a charity somewhere within the metro, and that charity doesn't then, build a store in their backyard, but we want to make a difference where they live.
Now that you've got 5 years of this under your belt, you've opened new stores, you're scaling your business very quickly, you're working with a lot of these folks on a daily basis. I would say, at least from what I can tell, you're probably about as dialed in as anyone I've ever met on sort of the issues in play here when it comes to employment for people with special needs. Beyond your business, and even maybe beyond Oklahoma, what changes systemically need to happen to change this landscape to make those numbers go down and be sort of better for these folks? Because it seems like we can do better than that. I mean, that's pretty bleak that a considerable chunk of our population is coming out of high school looking at, a not great future right now.
No, absolutely, Dan. And again, kudos for you for the question. Through Express Employment, we were given a grant to participate at the upper echelons of the Greater Oklahoma City Chamber. And so our voice has been able to be heard now amongst the biggest businesses in Oklahoma and beyond. So for example, we've done corporate training for Boeing. We've done corporate training for the Choctaw Nation, for the Metropolitan Library System. And so that's become one of our income streams, is going out and training businesses how to do what we do in terms of making jobs accessible, making the way attainable from the very beginning. It all starts with the person in the mirror, Dan. And so your listeners can make the difference. What does it take? Courage. Most of the time, people are just scared. Oh, I don't want to deal with the insurance and the liability. But again, back to Temple Grandin, you're more likely to deal with an error from someone who doesn't have a special need than someone who does, because the person with the special need will follow the rules. They will do it the way that they're taught to do it. So if you invest in proper training, you will have a more loyal employee. You will have a happier workforce overall. So both neurotypical and neurodiverse. So your culture will get better. And then the CFO will love this, Dan. You earn more money when you employ those with intellectual, developmental, or physical disabilities. You earn more money, not as a gimmick, but just as an outcome for doing the right thing. Well, funny enough, you get rewarded. People just need to do it. And again, we're happy to take somebody's donation, but I would much rather meet your listeners from them reaching out to nyaj.coffee saying, hey, can you come and talk at our conference to this association of professionals? Or can you come train my company how to do this? Because we want to make a difference. And reality is this, Dan, if they hire one friend, and think about this, don't put them in the janitor's closet. You've not met Danielle, but Danielle is 4 foot nothing. Okay. She's 8 foot sassy. Her big sister used to be Miss Oklahoma, and she is just as talented as her big sister on a microphone. And Danielle is the life of the party. Well, I don't know if you've been to a public school lately and walked into the front office, but most of the people working there don't want to be there. They're grouchy, they're grumpy. And I just start at the education level and say, put somebody like Danielle in the front office of every school in America, and suddenly the party has arrived. You want to be at school. You want to be at work. It's just little things like that.
That's great advice. And actually, you're right. That would make a huge difference. What do you tell people as you go and you speak to business leaders and you find people who have established businesses and their heart's in the right place, their mind's in the right place, and they say, hey, Tim, look, I want to create a more diverse ecosystem. I want to have, a more inclusive environment in my business, but how do I do that without admitting them? Because I don't think, in my experience in business, that most people go into something trying to kind of gatekeep, right? I think most businesses just sort of evolve. Hey, I need someone to fill this role. I'm going to put up an ad. People walk in the door. I'm going to hire the best one of the 10 that walked in the door, move on down the road, right? So I don't think there's a lot of sort of forethought that goes into that. But then a lot of times you take a step back and go, wow, everybody's kind of the same here. And what do you tell those people about how they can sort of start making that change and what the outcome is?
Thanks, Dan, again for the question. So obviously, being intentional means you have to take a step. Perhaps that first step is calling the local state's rehabilitative services organization. Usually there's an organization within the state that helps in that lane. And you will find at that point that the list is long. Usually at the state level, there's a People with Disabilities Day, usually at the Capitol. And there are job fairs oftentimes where they invite employers to, hey, come learn or let us educate you on how you can do this. But usually rehabilitative services are something akin to that at each state level. And then usually there's probably a nonprofit around. Here in Oklahoma City, most of us know about the Dale Rogers Training Center, and some of your listeners may be old enough to remember who Dale Rogers was. But DRTC, it is now known, has 800 employees with special needs adults, but most of them are off doing something, together, just with them. And our model obviously slightly different, where we're integrative, we're in the middle of the community. Places like that will at least know, hey, here's where you can find somebody. But I promise you this, think about this, because there's that 11% in the public school system, almost everybody within your circle, you're going to have multiple families where somebody's kid has Down syndrome, somebody's kid has autism, somebody's kid's in a wheelchair. You're going to find out pretty quickly just by throwing it out on social media. Hey guys, I'm considering this. You just reach out on social media in your own friend group. Any business owner is going to quickly come up with the pool of people.
I love that. Those are great tips and tactical too. So I appreciate that. Shift into you a little bit, Tim, because you and I had kind of a pre-conversation a couple of weeks ago and I enjoyed it. And I'm really enjoying this conversation right now. And you're a dynamic guy, right? Like it's coming through. I think our listeners can probably tell by now. You got a lot of energy.
It's the caffeine.
The caffeine. And the hat doesn't hurt either. So I like it. I think you've got a lot of real positive vibes. Tell me about your leadership style. How did that evolve? Is that something that's natural? Is that something you've worked on? You've had a pretty diverse background. So tell me about that.
I love this question perhaps the most because this is where I get to talk about the fact that once upon a time, I had a lot of talent and I knew it, and the ego got in the way. And it wasn't until I failed miserably in life and had some time on the anvil that you realized, oh, I don't have all the answers. I was privileged recently to speak at 6 high school graduations in basketball arenas across the state for our largest charter school, Epic. In the last 2 weeks, I've been able to speak to 72,000 people. I start my speech, funny enough, Dan, you didn't know this. I say I'm a man of many hats. And I reach under the lectern and I grab the fedora that I'm wearing now and say, this is my coffee hat. Looks good in a coffee shop, even better on a coffee farm. But before that, I'm asked who loves coffee, and the arena goes wild. You would have been the loudest. Then I take that hat off. Any music fans, any musical theater fans, and I pull out a pink cabbie hat like they wear in Newsies and give a hat tip to all those music lovers and those who love the theater. And then I'm like, any sports fans in the house? And of course, 3 of those graduations were at Lloyd Noble on the campus of the University of Oklahoma, where the Sooners play basketball. I'm like, hey, the staff's worked it out with me, guys. We're going to switch microphones. We're going to go to a handheld. And we're going to introduce you like you're the starting lineup of the Thunder, And so we get them all riled up and they're going to town. Anyway, afterwards, and their parents applaud them, I put on the mortar hat, the little cardboard
Yep.
Square that the graduates wear. Time to get down to business. And I talk about graduating from Hooker High, where we drove around in the Hooker activity bus, where we shopped at Hooker Hardware, but it's okay because we went to Hooker Church. It's a location, not a vocation. I could go on all day. I mentioned that, okay, I graduated valedictorian of Hooker High, right? I thought I knew everything. And then in college, I graduated summa cum laude and then master's. And I had all those answers, but it wasn't until I failed and learned from failure that I realized what leadership is. And leadership is about being transparent. Leadership's about saying, I don't know. I could use your help. And learning to ask for help as a leader is hard. But if you do it, then you get surrounded with a good team. And so the background noise of the cough, I apologize, but I don't apologize because that's the intern back there, right? And I couldn't do what I'm doing today without Cole because I'm on his phone. The chief marketing officer is hiding back here. She's over there as well. We now have this team of dynamic energy that is explosive because we were willing to ask for help. Obviously, it helps to galvanize people around a mission, something that we can all get excited about.
What was that fall like? Because what you're saying really rings true for me. What I like to say about 25-year-old Dan was that my ego was not in alignment with my skill set. I had to take a couple of pretty hard hits to figure that out. Life has a habit of doing that sometimes when you need it. And you're right. And I think transparency and honesty and integrity, those are really important skills. So it sounds like you had some sort of career setback. And then how'd you pick yourself back up? What happened from there? And how did that affect the way you run your business now?
Well, so for me, I suffered I went through a divorce, but my identity was tied up in what I did in ministry. And so when I lost ministry and marriage, I lost my identity and it took a while to get back. But my transformation came about through serving others, not focusing on myself. Going back to the roots of Hooker, Oklahoma, really, when I was delivering groceries to widows. So now I was serving widows again and serving the least of these. And when I had the opportunity to fight for Braxton, it's important. But I guess in some ways, growing up Hooker or in Hooker, was really the DNA that I'm building now. It's taking care of your neighbor. That's really what we're doing here. Now, besides that, I do think that we're talking about an organizational chart. Most companies have a traditional, tree and everything flows down and all that. We're trying to build a circular organization chart here. It doesn't make banks happy, by the way. But the idea that we're teams. Now, somewhere where that tire, the rubber meets the road, there's an individual on that slice of pie or, within those spokes. They're in charge of that space, but they're not by themselves. They're not by themselves. You have to lean on each other in order to be strong. That's the way the tire works. I may sit in the seat on top and then I'm guided by those handlebars where I have, our core values, which the board is responsible to make sure I live up to. And then we have a council of advisors that make sure we have processes that work. So your principles and your processes, your handlebars, the executive directors over here on the seat, but we don't go anywhere if it's not for those wheels. We don't go anywhere with those wheels without the community around us. Not sure if Joe didn't exist unless you come in and buy coffee, Dan. We're not a nonprofit that just gets money to go do what we do in a warehouse somewhere. We only work if the customers come in the front door.
What you're saying, it really is interesting. And I don't think I've ever had a conversation like this before. And I think today, and this applies not just to nonprofits, right? Like as so many companies now around the country or even the world are having to deal with remote employees and people working from home and people working from around the world. And that kind of pyramid-shaped org chart doesn't work very well anymore. And I think especially when you've got like an employee who's sitting in their living room in Florida and you've got someone else sitting in a home office in Oklahoma and you got someone else in Idaho, they can be isolated, they can be lonely, they need support, they need someone to lean on. And I had never really thought about it as sort of circular, but you're right. You still need those connections for people to feel, like they have support, like they have ideation, like they have someone who's got their back, like even just someone to listen when they're having a tough day. That's a really interesting concept. You kind of blew my mind just now. Thank you. So Tim, another question I've got for you, and then I've got one more and we'll wrap this up, but I know you've been very generous with your time. You run sort of an interesting business. You said in the beginning of this conversation that you've got a nonprofit that's on like a for-profit chassis, which I think is an interesting analogy. What are some key traits or skills you think are essential to lead a nonprofit business versus sort of a traditional business?
You have to care what people think. You won't be very successful for very long in the nonprofit space. You do have a lot of bosses, but at the same time, I think Not Your Average Joe has succeeded well because we've acted entrepreneurially throughout its existence. And again, and not just acted, it is up to us, right? I mean, so all those years in commission sales, right? If you're going to eat, you better go get busy. And so for us, and I want the friends to know that you got to work. You got to work hard. And just because you have a disability, it doesn't mean your hand out. You need to work too. And work provides not just value intrinsically, but you get to give your skill to the world. And Danielle can do something I can't do. She can light up a world when she walks in it. I mean, or a room. She just, man, pure effervescent joy. You used the word effusive earlier. I mean, that's Danielle to a T. I think that for people to be successful in the nonprofit space, I would love to see more nonprofits act entrepreneurially, frankly. They've become oftentimes too bureaucratic, do things the same old way, and we need innovation in our space. I think that would be good for everybody, and I guess that's another good word to use, just to be innovative.
Love it. Last question. It's a question I ask everybody, and you kind of hinted at this earlier, which is unusual on this show. So the way I learn is by making mistakes. And my life motto is make every mistake once. And I'm a hard knocks guy. And I figure, hey, if I screw something up, I got to learn from it and try not to repeat it and move forward. So, over the last 5 years at Not Your Average Joe, what is the biggest mistake you've made and what'd you learn from it?
So you did save the hard question for last, didn't you?
I do.
Wow. So we are an organization that is built on long suffering. When people say, how did you get here? I say often by grit and by grace. And because of that, a little bit, to be honest, Dan, we were too long suffering with our neurotypical employees early on. I wasn't willing to fire somebody when I should have because I was so concerned about taking them to the next level and helping them grow that I was a little bit blinded to the fact that they were impeding us from serving others or serving those with us better.
Good answer. I love it.
Unfortunately, we've learned that mistake, and so I'm probably firing 2 people this week.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, but sometimes you got to do it, right?
But when we do that, just FYI for your listeners, we help them find something else before the axe comes, unless they've done something, immoral or unrecoverable. We will help them succeed somewhere else. And it's not neurodivergent, it's neurotypical employees.
Yeah. That makes sense. That is the hard part about running a business, right? Is a lesson I've learned. By the way, I can completely relate to that. Because the first 5 years I was in business, I made that mistake over and over and over again. And I have learned the hard way. It never gets better. If someone's not working out, just sitting around waiting for something to magically happen only ends in cultural damage. And it's not good for the person either. It's not good for anybody. I think that's a solid lesson. Well, Tim, I loved this conversation. I appreciate your time. For our listeners that either want to come check you out and buy a cup of coffee, you want to order some beans online, want to find out more about how they can help your mission, where do they go? What do they do?
So on the World Wide Web, nyaj.coffee on Instagram, also at nyaj.coffee. We go by Not Your Average Joe as the coffee shop here in Oklahoma. On Facebook, there's a bar by that name in New York. That's not us, but those are your biggest ways. But Dan, just to say thank you, and we've enjoyed this conversation as well. I had a good time and appreciated getting to know you. I hope we can share a cup of coffee together soon. We do have coffee, and I didn't tell you, but we have whiskey pumpkin butter here. So your listeners might like that too.
I've got a good friend in Yukon, so when I come out there, I'll be paying you a visit. Well, that is the end of today's episode of OTSS. Let me know what you think by rating this podcast on the platform you are listening to. We also post these videos on YouTube, so be sure to like and subscribe there at OTSS Podcast. Likes, comments, and follows really help our show, so if you enjoyed it, please give us a 5-star review. Thank you again, Tim, for coming on, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, tschüss.